The woman nobody wanted was about to claim what nobody could take. Daisy Harper weighed 240 pounds the day she stepped off that train in Montana. And she'd spent her whole life learning what that number cost her. Respect, kindness, the basic decency of being seen as human. She came west because a man's letter promised her something different, a fresh start, a home, maybe even love. But when the platform cleared and the sun dropped low, leaving her alone with her trunk and her shame, she learned the cruelest lesson of all. Even 1,000 miles from home, rejection finds you. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train's whistle cut through the afternoon heat one last time before the engine pulled away, leaving Daisy Harper standing on a platform that suddenly felt enormous. Dust kicked up around her ankles, settling on the hem of her dark blue traveling dress, the one she'd spent 3 months sewing, letting out seams twice because her hands shook too much the first time to get the measurements right. She'd imagined this moment differently. In her mind, there'd been a man, tall, maybe, kind-eyed, certainly, someone who'd stepped forward with a smile that said, "You made it," instead of "What have I done?" She'd practiced her own smile in the dim reflection of the train window for 2 days straight, trying to find one that looked confident without being bold, hopeful without being desperate. Now she stood alone, and her face hurt from holding that practiced expression for nothing. The platform wasn't crowded. Montana didn't deal in crowds the way Philadelphia did. A handful of people had disembarked with her, a family with 3 children who'd been met by a weathered woman in a wagon, 2 men in suits who'd walked off without luggage like they knew exactly where they were going, and an elderly couple who'd been collected by someone Daisy assumed was their son. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone except her. She looked down at the letter in her hand, creased from being folded and unfolded so many times the paper had gone soft as fabric. The words were still there, unchanged by her staring. "Dear Miss Harper, I am a man of modest means but strong back and honest heart. I have land, a home that needs a woman's touch, and a life that feels incomplete without someone to share it. I don't need fancy, I need good. I need kind. If you're willing to take a chance on Montana and on me, I believe we could build something real together. Arrive August 12th. I'll be waiting. Yours in hope, Samuel Garrett. August 12th. Today." Daisy folded the letter again, tucked it into her bag, and picked up her trunk. It wasn't heavy. She didn't own much. A few dresses, some underthings, a book of poetry her mother had given her before she died, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, both of them young and lean and acceptable. The station agent had gone inside his office. Through the window she could see him shuffling papers, deliberately not looking her direction. She'd seen that before too. That careful avoidance, that studied disinterest that said, "I see you, I just don't want to deal with you." Fine. She didn't need his help. She sat down on her trunk, arranged her skirts as neatly as she could, and waited. An hour passed. The sun shifted, no longer directly overhead, but angling toward late afternoon. The heat didn't break. If anything, it intensified, baking up from the wooden platform and pressing down from the cloudless sky. Sweat gathered under Daisy's collar, between her breasts, along her lower back. She didn't move. Moving meant acknowledging something was wrong, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe Samuel had been delayed. A broken wagon wheel, a sick horse, some emergency on the homestead that couldn't wait. Men had responsibilities out here that city folk didn't understand. She'd read enough about frontier life to know that much. Another hour. The station agent left, locking his office behind him without a glance in her direction. A few people passed by on the street. This wasn't a proper town, just a railroad stop with a general store and a scattering of buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and never improved. No one approached her. No one asked if she needed help. Of course they didn't. Daisy had learned years ago that invisibility came in different forms. Sometimes people stared, sometimes they looked right through you. Both meant the same thing. The sky began to change, pale blue deepening toward purple at the edges. Still no Samuel, still no wagon rattling up the dirt road. Still no man with kind eyes stepping onto the platform with apologies and explanations. Just Daisy, and her trunk, and the slow, sick understanding spreading through her chest like ink in water. She'd been so careful with that letter. She'd written and rewritten her response 7 times, trying to sound honest without sounding desperate, trying to explain herself without making excuses. She'd included a photograph, the only one she had where the camera hadn't been quite close enough to capture her full size. In it, she was seated, with careful lighting, her face turned just so. She looked smaller. Not thin, but smaller. Had that been dishonest? She'd told herself no. She'd mentioned her build in her letter. "I'm a woman of substantial frame," she'd written, which felt more dignified than any of the other words people used. She hadn't lied. She'd just presented herself carefully. But maybe that photograph had created an expectation. Maybe Samuel had taken one look at her stepping off that train, all 240 pounds of her in solid, undeniable reality, and decided the bargain wasn't worth keeping. Maybe he'd been here. Maybe he'd seen her and left. The thought made her stomach turn. Not with hunger, though she hadn't eaten since morning. With shame. The old, familiar kind that tasted like metal and felt like something collapsing. She'd come so far. Not just in miles, though that was considerable. She'd come far in courage, in hope, in the desperate, wild belief that distance could change things. That Montana might not know what Philadelphia knew. That out here, where survival mattered more than appearance, a strong back and willing hands might count for something. Stupid. So stupid. "Miss?" The voice came from behind her, and Daisy's heart lurched before she could stop it. She turned too quickly, nearly losing her balance on the trunk, hope flaring bright and painful in her chest. Not Samuel. She knew that immediately. This man was taller, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that assessed her with the kind of directness that made her want to look away. He wore work clothes, denim pants, a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, boots that had seen serious use. Everything about him said rancher or homesteader, someone who'd stopped being gentle with things a long time ago. "Yes?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "You waiting for someone?" It was a simple question, but something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Daisy straightened her spine, pulled together what remained of her dignity. "I was. I expect there's been some delay." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted around his eyes. Not pity, she would have recognized that. Maybe something closer to resignation. "You're Daisy Harper." Not a question, a statement. Her heart, which had been hammering with hope moments before, went still and cold. "How did you know?" "Samuel Garrett asked me to meet the train today. Said if a woman came alone carrying more than she could manage, I should look after her." He paused. "You're the only one who fits." "Where is he?" The words came out sharper than she'd meant, edged with something that might have been anger, if anger weren't such a luxury. "Mr. Garrett, where is he?" "Sick. Been laid up for near about 2 weeks now. Started with a cough, turned into something worse. Doc says it's probably pneumonia, though we don't have facilities out here to know for certain." The words landed like stones, each one separate, heavy, final. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the question. "He'll likely recover, but he's in no condition to travel, and he won't be for some time." The man shifted his weight, and Daisy noticed he kept a respectful distance, not crowding her, not looming. "I'm Rhett Callahan. I've got the neighboring homestead to Samuel's place. When he took ill, I told him I'd keep watch for anyone coming off the train. Figured if you showed up, you'd need to know the situation." Daisy's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing them to stop. "Did he send a telegram? To let me know not to come?" He tried. "The line's been down for 3 days. Storm took out some poles north of here." Rhett's voice stayed level, delivering facts without decoration. "When the line didn't come back up, he asked me to meet you personal. Tell you what happened. See that you got back on the next train east if that's what you wanted." If that's what you wanted. The sky had gone from purple to deep blue, stars beginning to show themselves in the places where the light had fully drained away. The air was finally cooling, just enough to notice. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary evening in a place that would never be ordinary for her. "There won't be another train until day after tomorrow," Daisy said quietly. "That's right. And Mr. Garrett is at his sister's place in Billings. That's where he went when the fever got bad. Couldn't manage on his own." Billings. Daisy didn't know where that was exactly, but it clearly wasn't here. She should cry. Women in novels always cried at moments like this. But tears required a kind of surrender she wasn't ready for yet. And besides, crying never helped. It just made your face red and your nose run and gave people one more reason to look at you with discomfort. "Is there a hotel?" she asked instead. "Boarding house. Mrs. Chen runs it. Clean rooms, decent food. I can take you there." "I can pay." The words came out defensive, and she hated the sound of her own voice. "I have money. I'm not asking for charity." "Didn't think you were." Rhett reached for her trunk, lifting it like it weighed nothing. "Come on. We'll get you settled, then figure out what comes next." What comes next? As if there were options, as if this weren't just another version of the same story she'd lived her whole life. The one where things didn't work out, where promises meant for other people didn't extend to her, where the happy ending was always just out of reach. But she followed him anyway, because what else could she do? Sit on that platform until the next train came? Sleep under the stars like some kind of vagrant? She'd spent everything she had on the ticket west. Going back wasn't just humiliating, it was impossible. Rhett walked with purpose but didn't rush, adjusting his stride so she could keep up without having to scramble. That surprised her. Most people either charged ahead, making her work to follow, or slowed down so obviously it became its own kind of insult. The boarding house was a two-story structure that looked like it had been built with optimism and maintained with stubbornness. Paint peeled around the windows, and the porch sagged slightly on one side, but light glowed warm from inside, and the smell of something cooking drifted out to meet them. A woman appeared in the doorway before they reached the steps. Small, maybe 60, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that took in everything at once. "Rhett Callahan, if you're bringing me trouble at dinner time, I'll have words with you." "No trouble, Mrs. Chen. This is Miss Harper. She needs a room for a few days." Mrs. Chen's gaze shifted to Daisy, and there it was, the assessment. The quick head-to-toe that cataloged and judged and made decisions. Daisy had been measured like this her entire life. She knew what came next. The tight smile, the regretful excuse about no rooms available, the suggestion to try somewhere else, even though there wasn't anywhere else. But Mrs. Chen just nodded. $2 a night, includes breakfast and supper. You want lunch? That's extra. Payment up front. Daisy fumbled with her bag, found her coin purse, counted out $6. 3 nights. Enough time to figure out what to do. Where to go. How to survive this latest disaster. "Room 3, top of the stairs on the left," Mrs. Chen said, pocketing the coins. "Supper's in 20 minutes if you're hungry. Basin and pitcher in the room. Privy's out back." "Thank you." Mrs. Chen had already turned away, heading back to her kitchen. Rhett carried Daisy's trunk upstairs, set it down just inside the doorway of a small room that held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the darkening street. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, but he hesitated in the doorway, like there was something else he needed to say. Daisy waited. She was good at waiting. "Samuel's a good man," Rhett finally said. "He wouldn't have left you stranded by choice. When he's recovered, when he's back home, he'll still want to meet you, if that's something you want. And if it's not?" The question came out before she could stop it. "What then?" Rhett's expression was hard to read in the dim light from the hallway lamp. "Then you figure out what is. This country doesn't care much about plans, just about what you do when they fall apart." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs, the front door opening and closing with a soft click. Daisy sat down on the bed. It creaked under her weight, they always did. She stared at her hands, at the rough places where she'd scrubbed too many floors, washed too many dishes, worked too many hours in other people's houses, doing work they didn't want to do themselves. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that could fix things, make things, hold things together when they wanted to fall apart. Out the window, Montana sprawled dark and endless. No streetlights like Philadelphia. No familiar landmarks. Just space and silence and the weight of all that nothing pressing in. She should have cried then, should have let the disappointment and fear and exhaustion pour out. But somewhere between the platform and this small room, something had shifted inside her. Not hope. She was too tired for hope. But something harder. Something that felt like anger, if anger could be cold instead of hot. She'd come this far. She'd spent her savings, her courage, her last shred of faith that life might offer her something better. She'd crossed the country on the promise of a man who couldn't even stay healthy enough to meet her. But she'd done it. She'd made the journey. She'd stepped off that train, and she was damned if she was going to get right back on it. Daisy stood up, unpacked her trunk with methodical precision, and went downstairs to eat supper with strangers who didn't know her story yet, who hadn't yet decided what to think of her, who might, if she was lucky and careful, see her as something other than a disappointment. The dining room held 6 people besides herself, ranch hands, Mrs. Chen explained, who boarded there while working nearby spreads. They looked up when she entered, the conversation faltering for just a moment before resuming. No one stared. No one made room at their table, but no one told her to leave either. She took a seat at the end of one table, and Mrs. Chen brought her a plate without comment. Beef stew thick with potatoes and carrots, bread that was still warm, coffee that tasted like it had been sitting too long but was strong enough to matter. Daisy ate methodically, listening to the men talk about horses and weather and a fence that needed mending. Normal talk. The kind that didn't require her input, that let her sit there without having to explain herself. When she finished, she washed her plate in the kitchen. Mrs. Chen looked surprised but didn't object and went back upstairs. The room felt smaller in the full dark. The bed was harder than she'd expected. Outside, something howled, coyote maybe, or just the wind finding its voice. Tomorrow she'd decide what to do. Tomorrow she'd figure out if there was any possible future that didn't involve crawling back to Philadelphia in defeat. Tonight, she just needed to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. The mattress was unfamiliar, the sounds were strange, and her mind wouldn't settle. It kept cycling through the same images. The empty platform, Rhett's steady gaze, the letter that had promised so much and delivered nothing. Somewhere around midnight, she finally drifted off, and her dreams were full of trains that left without her, platforms that stretched on forever, and men who turned away when she called their names. She woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and the smell of bacon frying downstairs. For one confused moment, she forgot where she was. Thought maybe she was back in Philadelphia, in the narrow room she'd rented above the bakery where she'd worked. Then memory crashed back, and with it, the full weight of her situation. Day 2 in Montana, no plan, no prospects, no man waiting for her, just herself, and whatever she could figure out to do with that. Daisy washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, brown this time, more practical than the blue, and braided her hair with fingers that had finally stopped shaking. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen was clearing breakfast plates from the empty dining room. "You're up late," she said, not unkindly. "Most of the men are out by dawn." "I don't have anywhere I need to be." The admission felt like failure. "Well, if you're looking for something to do, I could use help in the kitchen. My girl who usually comes in is down with something, not asking for free labor. I'd pay a fair wage for a day's work." Daisy blinked. You'd want me to help? Can you cook, wash dishes, keep a kitchen in order?" "Yes, I worked in a boarding house in Philadelphia for 3 years. Before that, I was in service." "Then yes, I want you to help. Pays $1 for the day, breakfast and supper included. You interested?" $1 wasn't much, but it was something. And it was better than sitting in that small room thinking about everything that had gone wrong. "Yes," Daisy said. "I'm interested." Mrs. Chen nodded once, brisk and businesslike. "Good. Start with those dishes in the sink, then help me prep for supper. We feed 12 tonight, the usual 6 boarders plus some ranch hands coming in from the Callahan place." The Callahan place. Rhett's place. Something tightened in Daisy's chest, but she ignored it, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The kitchen was hot and cramped, but familiar in a way that eased something inside her. She knew how to move in a space like this, knew the rhythm of cooking for a crowd, the timing required to get everything done at once. Mrs. Chen was exacting but fair, pointing out what needed doing without unnecessary criticism. They worked in companionable silence for most of the morning, breaking only when Mrs. Chen needed to explain where something was kept or how she liked things done. At noon, they stopped for a quick lunch of leftover bread and cheese, eating standing up at the kitchen counter. "You're good at this," Mrs. Chen said, wiping crumbs from her mouth. "Better than my usual girl, and she's been doing it for 2 years. I've had practice." Where'd you learn to cook like this? Your mother? Partly. Mostly from necessity. I went into service young after my mother died. Started in the kitchen, worked my way up to cook in one household. Daisy didn't mention that she'd been dismissed from that position when the lady of the house decided she was setting a poor example for the other staff. Being fat was contagious, apparently. Why'd you leave Philadelphia? Mrs. Chen asked, and there was no judgment in the question, just curiosity. Daisy considered lying, considered saying something vague about seeking adventure or wanting a change. But something about Mrs. Chen's straightforward manner made deception feel wrong. I came to marry a man I'd never met. Mail-order bride, they call it. He wrote me letters for 6 months, said he wanted a wife, said he had a homestead and a life ready for someone to share it. She paused. He got sick, couldn't meet the train. Now I'm here with no plan and almost no money, trying to figure out what comes next. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment, and Daisy braced herself for pity or condescension or well-meaning advice that would miss the mark entirely. Instead, Mrs. Chen said, "You going back?" "No." The word came out flat and certain, surprising them both. "Can't afford it," Daisy added, trying to soften the finality. "Spent everything I had on the ticket west." "That's not why you're not going back." Daisy's hand stilled in the dishwater. "What?" "Money's one problem, but that's not why you're staying. You could wire someone back east, ask for help, could find some way to scrape together the fare. But you're not going to do that." "How do you know?" "Because I recognize the look. I came west 30 years ago for similar reasons. Man made promises, man didn't keep them. And when I had the chance to go back east, I couldn't do it. Because going back meant admitting defeat, meant confirming everything they'd always thought about me." Mrs. Chen dried her hands on her apron. "Am I wrong?" Daisy's throat was tight. "No, you're not wrong." "Then you're going to need more than 3 nights in a boarding house room. You're going to need work, a real job, something that pays enough to keep you fed and sheltered." "I don't suppose you're hiring?" "I am, actually, but not for kitchen work. I need someone to manage this place, take over the day-to-day so I can focus on expanding my operation. I've been wanting to buy the building next door, turn it into additional housing, but I can't do that and keep this place running smooth." Daisy stared at her. "You'd trust me with that? You've been here one day and you've already reorganized my pantry, fixed that sticky cabinet door I've been meaning to get to, and figured out a more efficient way to time the cooking. You're competent, you're not lazy, and you don't seem like you're going to cause drama with the boarders. Those are my main requirements. I don't know anything about running a boarding house in Montana. You'll learn. Same way everyone learns everything out here, by doing it and figuring out the mistakes as you go." Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "Pays $15 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters. There's a room on the ground floor I've been using for storage. It's small, but it's private. You interested?" $15 a month. It wasn't much, but it was steady, and room and board meant she wouldn't have to worry about where she'd sleep or how she'd eat. It meant staying, really staying, not just delaying her departure. "What about Samuel?" The question surprised her. She hadn't planned to ask it. "What if he recovers? What if he still wants—" "Then you'll deal with that when it happens." But making decisions based on what a man might want later is how women end up stuck in bad situations. You make the decision that works for you now. If things change, you adapt. Practical advice. Unsentimental. Exactly what Daisy needed to hear. "Yes," she said. "I'm interested." Mrs. Chen smiled. Not a big smile, just a small upward curve of her mouth that suggested satisfaction. "Good. You can move into the ground floor room tomorrow. Tonight, finish helping me with supper. The ranch hands will be here at 6, and they eat like they're storing up for winter." The afternoon passed in a blur of chopping, stirring, and timing. Daisy fell into the rhythm easily, her body knowing what to do even when her mind was still trying to catch up with the sudden shift in her circumstances. She had a job. She had a place to stay. She had, against all odds and expectations, landed on her feet. It didn't feel real yet, but maybe that was okay. Maybe real would come later, after she'd proven to herself that this wasn't just another thing that would fall apart when she stopped looking. At 6 o'clock, the ranch hands arrived, dusty, loud, hungry. They filled the dining room with noise and movement, tracking dirt across Mrs. Chen's clean floors and reaching for food before grace was said. Not that anyone said grace. This wasn't that kind of place. Daisy carried out platters of roasted chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes, baskets of biscuits. The men took what they wanted without comment, focused on food rather than conversation. She'd almost made it back to the kitchen when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Harper." Rhett Callahan sat at the far end of the table, a plate in front of him but no food on it yet. He'd cleaned up since yesterday. His hair was damp like he'd recently washed, his shirt was different, but he still had that same direct gaze that made her feel seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and strangely reassuring. "Mr. Callahan." "Heard you're staying on, working for Mrs. Chen." News traveled fast in small places. Daisy had forgotten that. "That's right." "Good." He reached for the chicken, served himself with quick efficiency. "This country needs people who aren't afraid of hard work." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either, just an observation, stated as fact. Daisy nodded once and retreated to the kitchen where Mrs. Chen was already plating dessert, apple pie, made fresh that morning. "He's a good man," Mrs. Chen said, following Daisy's gaze through the doorway. "Rhett keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair, honest, more than can be said for most men out here." "He's Samuel's neighbor," Daisy said, as if that explained something. "He is. And when Samuel took sick, Rhett's the one who rode 20 miles to fetch the doctor, the one who made sure Samuel got to his sister's place in Billings, the one who kept watch on Samuel's homestead so no one would squat there or steal what wasn't nailed down." Mrs. Chen cut the pie into even slices. "Like I said, good man." Daisy carried the pie out, served it without meeting anyone's eyes, and went back to the kitchen to start on the evening dishes. Outside, the sun was setting, the sky going orange and pink and purple in ways that never happened in Philadelphia, where buildings blocked most of the view and smoke from factories stained everything gray. She stood at the window for a moment, hands in soapy water, watching the light change. Tomorrow she'd move into her new room, start her new job, begin figuring out what a life in Montana might look like for someone like her, someone who'd crossed the country hoping for one thing and found something entirely different instead. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was hers, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The ground floor room smelled like dust and old wood and something else Daisy couldn't quite identify, maybe just years of disuse. Mrs. Chen hadn't been lying when she called it small. The space barely fit a bed, a dresser, and a chair, with maybe 3 feet of floor between them, but it had a window that faced the street, a door that locked from the inside, and most importantly, it was hers. She spent the first morning cleaning, scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees, washing the window until light came through clear, beating the mattress until her arms ached and no more dust came out. By noon, the room looked almost livable. By evening, with her few belongings unpacked and arranged, it looked like someone actually lived there. Not someone passing through, someone staying. That first week passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wake before dawn, start the kitchen fires, prepare breakfast for 12 hungry men who barely looked up from their plates. Clean, prep for the next meal, manage the endless cycle of laundry and dishes and repairs that came with keeping a boarding house running. Mrs. Chen watched her work with the kind of attention that felt like a test, but if Daisy was failing, the older woman never said so. The boarders mostly ignored her, which was a blessing. They ate what she cooked, left their rooms in varying states of disaster, and occasionally grunted something that might have been thanks. Rhett Callahan came for supper 3 or 4 times that first week, always sitting in the same spot, always eating quickly and leaving before the other men started their card games or storytelling. He never tried to make conversation with her, never asked how she was settling in or whether she'd heard from Samuel, just nodded when she brought food to the table, ate in silence, and left coins on his plate when he was done. Always exact change, never making her scramble for it. It was the kind of courtesy that came from not wanting to be a bother, and Daisy appreciated it more than she could say. On the 8th day, Mrs. Chen called her into the small office off the kitchen, barely more than a closet with a desk crammed into it, and spread out a ledger. "This is the money side," she said, pointing to columns of numbers written in precise handwriting. "Income, expenses, what we're owed, what we owe. You need to understand it if you're going to run this place." Daisy stared at the numbers. She could read and write. Her mother had insisted on that much education, but bookkeeping was different, more complicated. I'm not sure You'll learn? Sit down. For the next hour, Mrs. Chen walked her through it. How to track what each boarder paid, how to calculate food costs, how to plan for repairs and unexpected expenses. It was tedious work, but Daisy found herself focusing with an intensity that surprised her. This wasn't just numbers on a page. This was survival, security, the difference between making it and going under. "Why are you teaching me all this?" she asked, when Mrs. Chen finally closed the ledger. "You could just handle the money yourself." "Because I won't always be here. I'm 63 years old, Miss Harper. My knees hurt when it rains, my eyes aren't what they used to be, and I'm tired. I've been running this place for 15 years, and I'm ready to do less of it." She tapped the ledger with one finger. "I need someone who can take over when I step back. Someone who won't steal from me or run the place into the ground through incompetence. You might be that person. We'll see." It wasn't exactly a vote of confidence, but it was more than Daisy had expected, more than anyone had offered her in years. "I won't let you down," she said. "Don't make promises you might not keep. Just do the work. That's all I'm asking." The second week was harder. One of the boarders, a ranch hand named Cooper with a mean streak and a drinking problem, started causing trouble. He'd come in late, drunk and loud, waking the other men and tracking mud through the clean hallway. He'd make comments when Daisy brought food to the table. Nothing she could quite call out, but enough to make her skin crawl. "Lot of woman here," he'd said one night, grinning at the man next to him. "Bet she could keep a man warm all winter." The other men had gone quiet, uncomfortable but not willing to intervene. Daisy had set the platter down harder than necessary and walked away, her face burning. Mrs. Chen had been in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You want me to handle it?" she'd asked. "No," Daisy had said, surprising herself. "I'll deal with it if it happens again." But she didn't know how. In Philadelphia, she'd learned to make herself invisible when men like Cooper showed up. Duck her head, finish her work quickly, get out before things escalated. But here, she couldn't disappear. This was her job, her home. Running away meant letting him win. The next night, Cooper came in drunk again. This time, when Daisy brought out the food, he reached for her, just grabbed her wrist as she set down his plate, holding tight enough to hurt. "Why don't you sit with us, sweetheart? Take a load off." The other men looked away. No one spoke. Daisy looked down at Cooper's hand on her wrist, then up at his face. He was grinning, pleased with himself, expecting her to pull away or make a scene. Instead, she picked up the plate she'd just set down, still full of hot stew, and dumped it in his lap. The room went silent. Cooper shot to his feet, cursing, stew dripping down his pants. "You crazy!" "Touch me again, and it'll be coffee next time. Boiling." Her voice came out steady, harder than she knew she could make it. "And you'll find somewhere else to board." You can't throw me out." "Yes, she can." Mrs. Chen's voice cut through from the kitchen doorway. "This is my establishment. She speaks for me. You don't like the rules, there's the door." Cooper looked between them, calculation working behind his eyes. Then he grabbed his coat and stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The remaining men went back to their food, the tension breaking like a snapped string. One of them, an older ranch hand named Pete, caught Daisy's eye and gave her a small nod. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. Her hands didn't start shaking until she got back to the kitchen. "You did good," Mrs. Chen said quietly, "but he'll likely cause more trouble before he's done." She was right. Cooper came back that night, pounding on the door at 2 a.m, shouting about his belongings and demanding to be let in. Mrs. Chen appeared with a shotgun, not pointed at him, just held casual across her arms, and told him his things would be on the porch in the morning, and if he came back after that, she'd involve the sheriff. He left. His belongings, when Daisy packed them the next day, amounted to a dirty bedroll, some spare clothes, and 3 empty whiskey bottles. "Good riddance," Mrs. Chen said, watching Daisy set the bundle on the porch. "But you should know, men like that, they don't forget being embarrassed. He might come back around looking for revenge." "Let him try," Daisy said, and meant it. Something had shifted in her that night. Some part of herself she'd kept buried for years had surfaced. The part that was tired of being quiet, tired of making herself small, tired of letting people treat her like she didn't matter. She dumped hot stew on a man who thought he could grab her without consequences. And the world hadn't ended. Mrs. Chen hadn't fired her. The other boarders hadn't turned on her. If anything, they seemed to respect her more. The third week brought new challenges. The stove broke. Or rather, the flue got blocked and started smoking out the kitchen. Mrs. Chen had been planning to hire someone to fix it, but Daisy climbed up on the roof herself with a long brush and cleared it out, ignoring the way her dress got filthy and her hands got scraped. Then the well pump seized up, and she spent an afternoon taking it apart piece by piece until she found the problem. A broken seal that she replaced with leather cut from an old boot, since the general store didn't stock pump parts. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Mrs. Chen asked, watching Daisy reassemble the mechanism. Necessity. When you can't afford to hire help, you learn to fix things yourself. Daisy wiped grease from her hands. "My mother kept our house running for 10 years after my father died. She taught me that being poor means being resourceful. You're not poor now, you've got steady work. $15 a month isn't exactly wealthy." "No, but it's more than nothing, and you're building something here. Experience, skills, reputation." Mrs. Chen paused. "People are starting to talk about you." Daisy's stomach dropped. "What are they saying?" "That you're competent, that you don't take nonsense, that Mrs. Chen's boarding house runs better now than it has in years." She smiled slightly. "It's all good talk, Miss Harper. Don't look so worried." But Daisy had learned not to trust good talk. Good talk could turn on you fast when people decided they didn't like you anymore. Still, she nodded and went back to work, trying not to think about it too hard. It was late afternoon on a Thursday when Rhett showed up outside of his usual supper time. Daisy was in the side yard hanging laundry on the line Mrs. Chen had strung between two posts when she heard his voice. "Miss Harper, you got a minute?" She turned, a wet sheet heavy in her hands. He was on horseback, a big bay gelding that looked like it could pull a plow or outrun trouble, depending on what was needed. "I'm working, Mr. Callahan. I can see that. This won't take long." He swung down from the saddle, looped the reins over the fence post. "I've got a proposition for you." Her hand stilled on the sheet. "What kind of proposition?" "The business kind. I need help out at my place, and I'm willing to pay for it." "I already have a job." "I know. I'm not asking you to quit. I'm asking if you'd be willing to come out 1 or 2 days a week. Do some cleaning, cooking, maybe help organize things. I'd pay you $2 a day plus meals." $2 a day. That was more than most ranch hands made. "Why me?" she asked. "There must be other people who could—" "There are, but I need someone who knows how to work, who won't waste time gossiping or snooping through my things, and who I can trust to show up when they say they will." He met her eyes. "You've proven you're all those things." "How would I even get there? I don't have a horse." "I'd come get you in the morning, bring you back in the evening. You'd work from about 7 to 5, with a break for lunch." Daisy hung the sheet, using the time to think. $2 a day, even just once a week, would add up fast. She could save money, build something more than just subsistence. But going out to a man's homestead alone felt dangerous in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Not because she thought Rhett would hurt her, she didn't get that sense from him, but because it felt like crossing a line, putting herself in a situation that could be misunderstood. "What does Mrs. Chen think about this?" she asked. "Already asked her. She said it was your decision, but she doesn't object as long as it doesn't interfere with your work here." Of course he'd asked first. That was the kind of man he seemed to be, methodical, careful, trying to do things the right way. "1 day a week," Daisy said. "Saturdays, and I want $3. Rhett's eyebrows went up. "3? You're asking me to travel 10 miles each way, work a full day, and you're getting someone who knows what they're doing. That's worth $3. For a moment, she thought she'd pushed too hard, that he'd say no and walk away and she'd have gambled wrong. Then he smiled, just a small quirk of his mouth, but it changed his whole face, made him look younger, less hard. $3 it is. I'll pick you up this Saturday at 6:30. Bring work clothes." He was back on his horse and riding away before she could second-guess herself. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the kitchen when Daisy came back inside. "You drive a hard bargain," she said. "You were listening?" "I was in the yard. Sound carries." She pulled a bowl of beans toward her, started sorting through them for stones. $3 is good money. You planning to save it or spend it? Save it, at least most of it. Smart. This country rewards people who plan ahead. Mrs. Chen's hands moved quickly, practiced. You worried about working for him? Should I be? No. Rhett's not the type to make trouble for women. If anything, he's too respectful. Keeps people at arm's length so there's no chance of misunderstanding. She paused. His wife died 3 years ago, in childbirth. Baby didn't make it either. The words landed heavy. Daisy stopped in the doorway, processing. I didn't know he'd been married. Most people don't talk about it. He doesn't, but it changed him. Made him even more withdrawn than he already was. Mrs. Chen looked up from the beans. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for him. I'm telling you so you understand why he is the way he is, why he keeps things business only. It's not personal. I wasn't thinking it was, Daisy said quietly. But that night, alone in her small room, she thought about it. About a man who'd lost everything and kept going anyway, who still worked his land, still helped his neighbors, still showed up for supper at Mrs. Chen's boarding house like his life hadn't been torn apart. She understood that. The keeping going part. The doing what needed to be done even when everything hurt. Maybe that's why he'd offered her the work. Not pity, not charity, but recognition. One survivor seeing another. Saturday came cold and clear, the kind of morning where you could see your breath, and the ground crunched under your feet. Daisy was ready by 6:15, dressed in her oldest work dress with a shawl wrapped tight against the chill. Rhett arrived exactly on time, driving a wagon this time instead of riding. He helped her up onto the seat without comment, and they headed out of town as the sun started painting the sky pink. They didn't talk much during the drive. Rhett seemed content with silence, and Daisy was too busy looking at the landscape to make conversation. The land out here was different from anything she'd known, vast and open, and somehow both beautiful and hostile at the same time. You could see for miles in every direction, which meant there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to pretend to be anything other than what you were. The Callahan homestead sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds by a rise of land to the north. The house was simple, wood frame, single story, with a porch that wrapped around two sides. A barn stood nearby, solid and well-maintained. Fences stretched out in neat lines, defining pastures where cattle grazed. It looked like the kind of place someone had built carefully, with intention, not thrown together fast like some of the structures in town. I keep things clean enough, Rhett said as he helped her down from the wagon. But it could use a woman's touch. Organization, mainly. I'm not good at putting things where they make sense. Inside, the house was Spartan, but not dirty. The main room held a table, some chairs, a cold stove. Dishes were stacked in a basin by the sink, washed but not put away. Books lined a shelf on one wall, more than Daisy had expected. Kitchen first, Rhett said. I'll show you where things go, then leave you to it. I've got work to do outside. He walked her through the house quickly, showed her the pantry, explained his system for organizing tools, pointed out things that needed attention. Then he grabbed his coat and headed out, leaving her alone. Daisy stood in the middle of the main room for a moment, taking it in. This was a man's space, clearly. Functional, efficient, but lonely too. There were signs of someone who used to live here, a set of good china in the back of a cupboard, curtains that were too delicate for a man to have chosen, a rocking chair by the window that looked like it had been built for someone smaller. The wife. The one who died. Daisy didn't touch those things. Instead, she focused on what was hers to handle. The dishes, the floors, the accumulation of dust and disorder that came from living alone without really caring how things looked. She worked steadily through the morning, falling into the rhythm she knew best. Wash, dry, organize. Sweep, scrub, arrange. By noon, the kitchen was transformed. Everything in its place, surfaces clean, order restored. Rhett came in for lunch, stamping mud off his boots at the door. He stopped when he saw the kitchen, taking it in. It looks different, he said. Is that a problem? No, it's good. He washed his hands at the sink, and Daisy noticed how careful he was to leave everything as he'd found it. You eat yet? I was waiting to see what you wanted. I usually just eat whatever's easy, but if you want to cook something, I've got eggs, bacon, bread. some potatoes that need using. Daisy cooked while he sat at the table, reading a newspaper that looked like it was at least a week old. She made scrambled eggs with bacon, fried potatoes with onions, fresh bread toasted over the stove. It was more than whatever's easy, but she couldn't help herself. Cooking was what she knew how to do, how she made sense of the world. They ate without talking much. Rhett seemed to appreciate silence the way some people appreciated conversation, as a comfort rather than something to be filled. After lunch, he went back outside, and Daisy tackled the rest of the house. There wasn't much to it: a bedroom, a small office, another room that looked like it had been meant for something but now just held storage. She cleaned carefully, respectfully, trying not to intrude on his privacy more than necessary. In the bedroom, she found a photograph on the dresser. A woman, young and pretty, with dark hair and a serious expression. The wife, certainly. Daisy didn't pick it up, but she made sure to dust around it carefully, leaving it exactly where it had been. By 5 o'clock, the house looked and felt different. Cleaner, yes, but also more organized, more cared for. Like someone actually lived there instead of just existing there. Rhett came in as she was putting away the cleaning supplies, looked around with that same assessing expression. "You work fast," he said. "I've had practice." He pulled $3 from his pocket, held them out. As agreed. Daisy took the money, felt the weight of it in her palm. $3 for one day's work. It felt almost unfair, almost too much. "Same time next Saturday?" Rhett asked. "If you want." "I do." The drive back to town was quiet again, but different somehow. More comfortable, like they'd established something between them. Not friendship exactly, but mutual respect, an understanding. He dropped her off in front of the boarding house as the sun was setting, tipped his hat, and drove away. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, starting preparations for Sunday breakfast. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Fine. He paid me $3 like he said he would." "And?" "And nothing. I cleaned his house, cooked one meal, came back, that's all." Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "That's all, for now." Daisy didn't know what that meant, and she was too tired to ask. She went to her room, put the $3 in the small box where she kept her savings, and lay down on her bed without bothering to change out of her work clothes. She'd been in Montana 3 weeks. She had a job, a room, a second source of income. She had respect for Mrs. Chen and the boarders. She had routine and purpose, and something that was starting to feel like stability. It wasn't what she'd come for. Samuel Garrett was still in Billings, still recovering, still a question mark in her future. But lying there in the growing dark, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night, Daisy realized she wasn't waiting for him anymore. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was building something, slowly, carefully, with her own hands and her own will. And whether Samuel came back or not, whether he still wanted her or not, she'd be okay. That thought should have scared her, should have felt like giving up. Instead, it felt like freedom. The pattern held for 6 weeks. Every Saturday, Rhett arrived at 6:30 sharp, and Daisy climbed into his wagon for the ride out to his homestead. She'd clean, cook, organize whatever needed organizing, and he'd pay her $3 before driving her back to town. They developed an easy rhythm, not quite friendship, but something steadier, more reliable. She learned things about him without him saying much. That he took his coffee black and strong enough to strip paint, that he read everything he could get his hands on, newspapers, books, even the almanac cover to cover. That he was meticulous about his work, but careless about himself. Forgetting meals if she didn't cook them, wearing shirts with missing buttons until she fixed them without asking. And he learned things about her too, she suspected. That she couldn't stand waste. She'd save every scrap, find a use for everything. That she worked best in silence but hummed sometimes without realizing it. That she was stronger than she looked, capable of hauling water or moving furniture without complaint. They didn't talk about Samuel. The letter that had brought her west sat in her drawer at the boarding house, unread after that first day. She'd thought about writing to him, asking after his health, but the words never came. What was there to say? "I'm doing fine without you. I've built a life that doesn't need the one you promised me." It felt cruel. But it was also true. October brought the first real cold, the kind that made her grateful for the extra blankets Mrs. Chen had found her. The leaves on the few trees in town turned yellow and orange before dropping off completely, leaving everything looking skeletal and exposed. Business at the boarding house picked up as ranch hands who'd been sleeping in bunkhouses or under the stars during summer decided walls and a roof were worth paying for. Mrs. Chen raised the rates, $2.50 a night now, and men still came. Daisy cooked for 15, then 18, then 20 on busy nights, her arms aching from stirring massive pots and her feet swelling in her boots. But she didn't complain. Every night brought more money into the ledger, and Mrs. Chen had started paying her a small percentage of the profits on top of her regular wages. The box where Daisy kept her savings was getting heavier. It was a Wednesday in late October when everything changed. Daisy was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for stew when Mrs. Chen came in holding a telegram. Her expression was carefully neutral, which meant bad news. "This came for you," she said, holding out the thin paper. Daisy wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. The message was brief, formal. Samuel Garrett, recovered. Stop returning to Homestead November 1st. Stop requests meeting with Miss Harper at earliest convenience. Stop. Her hands didn't shake. That surprised her. She read it twice, making sure she understood, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. "You going to meet him?" Mrs. Chen asked. "I don't know." "That's honest, at least." Daisy went back to chopping vegetables, but her mind was elsewhere. Samuel Garrett, the man whose letter had brought her here, the man she'd traveled across the country to marry, the man who'd never shown up. He was back, and he wanted to see her. The logical part of her brain said she should go. She'd made a commitment or something like it. He hadn't abandoned her on purpose. He'd been sick. That wasn't his fault. Maybe they could still make something work. But the rest of her, the part that had scrubbed floors and fixed pumps and dumped hot stew on men who grabbed her, that part recoiled at the idea. She'd worked too hard to build this life. She wasn't the same woman who'd stepped off that train 2 months ago, hopeful and desperate and willing to accept whatever scraps were offered. She was someone different now, someone who knew her worth. That night, Rhett came for supper. Daisy served his food without meeting his eyes, but he noticed anyway. He always noticed. After the meal, as she was clearing plates, he caught her attention. "Something wrong?" "No." "You're a terrible liar." She almost smiled despite herself. "I got a telegram. Samuel's recovered. He wants to meet." Rhett's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "When?" "Soon. He's coming back to his homestead in a few days." "You planning to go?" "I don't know," she said again, and hated how uncertain she sounded. Rhett was quiet for a moment, then stood, pulled on his coat. "Can I show you something? Won't take long." Daisy glanced toward the kitchen, where Mrs. Chen was elbow-deep in dishes. "Go on," Mrs. Chen called out. "I've got this." They walked in silence through the darkening streets, Rhett's long stride adjusted to match hers. He led her to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land and pointed toward the horizon. "See that?" he said. She looked. In the fading light, she could make out structures in the distance, the shapes of homesteads scattered across the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, lamps being lit in windows. "Every one of those places," Rhett said, "was built by someone who came here with a plan and had to change it. My grandparents came to farm wheat. Land wouldn't support it. They switched to cattle. My father wanted to raise horses. Market collapsed. He adapted. That's what this place teaches you. The plan doesn't matter as much as what you do when it falls apart." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're standing at a choice point. You can go back to the original plan, meet Samuel, see if what he offered still makes sense. Or you can stick with what you've built. There's no wrong answer. But whichever you pick, make sure it's yours. Don't choose something because you think you owe it to someone else." He turned and started walking back toward the boarding house, and Daisy followed, his words settling in her mind like stones in still water. Saturday came, and she went to his homestead as usual, but the easy rhythm felt disrupted. She worked mechanically, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing cupboards that didn't need it. Rhett stayed outside longer than normal, giving her space. At lunch, she finally asked what had been bothering her all week. "Did you know Samuel well, before he got sick?" Rhett chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Well enough. He's a decent man, works hard, keeps his word when he can." But? No but. He's decent. Just, Rhett paused, choosing words carefully. He's looking for a particular thing. A wife who'll run his house, raise his children, fit into the life he's already built. There's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't leave much room for what the woman might want. And you think I want something different? I think you've spent 2 months proving you do. The conversation stayed with her through the rest of the day, through the quiet ride back to town, through the evening service at the boarding house. That night, she pulled out Samuel's original letter and read it again, trying to see what had captivated her so completely 2 months ago. I don't need fancy. I need good. I need kind. She'd read those words as a promise, as someone finally seeing value in the things she had to offer instead of focusing on what she lacked. But now, reading them again, they felt different. Not a promise, a job description. He needed good. He needed kind. He needed someone to fill a role. And maybe she would have done it 2 months ago. Would have been grateful for the chance. But not anymore. The next morning, she walked to the telegraph office and sent a message to Samuel Garrett. Thank you for your letter. Stop. Circumstances have changed. Stop. I wish you well. Stop. Daisy Harper. It cost her 40 cents and felt like the best money she'd ever spent. November arrived with the first snow. Not much, just enough to dust the ground white and make everything look cleaner than it was. The boarding house stayed full, men seeking warmth and hot meals. Daisy cooked until her feet went numb, managed the books until her eyes burned, and fell into bed each night too tired to dream. On the second Saturday of November, Rhett picked her up as usual, but instead of heading straight to his homestead, he detoured toward a property she didn't recognize. Where are we going? She asked. Samuel's place. Figured you should see it, since you turned him down, I mean. Why would I need to see it? Because he's leaving, moving to Billings permanently to live with his sister. His health's not good enough for homesteading anymore. He's selling the land. Daisy's stomach tightened. He's selling? Listed it yesterday. Good property, 160 acres, decent water, solid structures. It'll go fast. They pulled up to a homestead that looked similar to Rhett's. Simple house, sturdy barn, fenced pastures. But where Rhett's place felt lived in and cared for, this one felt abandoned. The porch sagged. Weeds grew high around the foundation. One of the barn doors hung crooked on its hinges. He couldn't keep up with it after he got sick, Rhett explained. And before that, he was doing it all alone. It's too much land for one person to manage properly. They walked the property in silence. Daisy noticed things she wouldn't have seen 2 months ago, where the fences needed mending, where the well was positioned poorly for the house, where erosion was starting to become a problem. But she also saw potential, good grazing land, a root cellar that had been built right, fruit trees that just needed pruning. How much is he asking? The question came out before she could stop it. Rhett named a figure that made her breath catch. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having, more than she could save in years at her current wages. It's worth it, Rhett added, for someone who knows how to work it. They drove to his homestead after that, and Daisy threw herself into work with unusual intensity, trying not to think about Samuel's land or the life she might have had there, trying not to imagine what it would feel like to own something, to have land that was hers, not just a room she rented or a job that could disappear. At lunch, Rhett was quieter than usual. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at her directly. I've got a proposition for you, different from the Saturday work. What kind of proposition? Partnership. I want to expand my operation, get more cattle, improve the breeding stock, maybe add some infrastructure, but I need help. Real help, not just someone to clean once a week. He paused. I'm offering you a stake. You work the land with me. We split the profit 60-40. You get the 40. In exchange, you help with everything. Cattle management, repairs, planning, decision-making, all of it. Daisy stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I can't manage it alone, and I trust you to do the work. Because you're wasting your potential cooking for ranch hands who don't appreciate it. Because... He stopped, started again. Because you deserve a chance to build something that's yours. I don't know anything about cattle ranching. You didn't know anything about running a boarding house either. You learned. Mrs. Chen needs me. Mrs. Chen is selling the boarding house. Didn't she tell you? The room tilted slightly. What? She got an offer last week. Good money. She's taking it. Figured she'd tell you herself, but since we're talking about futures, he shrugged. Your job there has maybe 6 weeks left, 2 months if the sale falls through. Daisy felt like she'd been punched. Mrs. Chen was selling. The boarding house, her job, her home, her security was disappearing. Why didn't she tell me? Maybe she was waiting for the right time. Or maybe she figured you'd work it out on your own. Rhett's voice gentled slightly. Point is, you're going to need something new anyway. This could be it. She wanted to say yes. The word was right there, ready to spill out, but fear held it back. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Then we both fail and we figure out what comes next. But I don't think you will. He stood, started clearing the lunch dishes. You don't have to decide now. Think about it. Let me know by the end of the month. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When he dropped her off, Daisy went straight to find Mrs. Chen. The older woman was in her office, working on the books. She looked up when Daisy appeared in the doorway, and her expression told Daisy that she already knew what this was about. Rhett told you, Mrs. Chen said. Why didn't you? Because I wanted you to have options before I dropped this on you. Wanted you to be thinking about your next move, not panicking about losing this one. She closed the ledger. I was going to tell you next week. Sale closes December 15th. New owner takes possession January 1st. What will you do? Move to California. My daughter's there. She's been asking me to come for years. Figured it was time. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. I'm tired, Miss Harper. Ready to rest. And me? What am I supposed to do? Whatever you want. You've got skills now, experience, references. You could get hired at any boarding house or hotel between here and the coast. She paused. Or you could do something different, something bigger. Rhett offered me a partnership. I know. He asked my opinion before he made the offer. What did you tell him? That you'd be a fool to turn it down. That you're one of the smartest, hardest working people I've met. That if anyone could make a go of ranching, it'd be you. Mrs. Chen leaned back in her chair. But I also told him to make sure you understood what you'd be getting into. Ranching isn't easy work. It's dangerous, unpredictable. One bad winter can wipe you out. So you think I shouldn't do it? I think you should do whatever scares you the right amount. Too much fear and you'll be paralyzed. Too little and you'll be reckless. But the right amount? That's where growth happens. Daisy left the office feeling more uncertain than when she'd entered. She had 6 weeks to figure out her entire future. 6 weeks to decide between safety and risk, between staying small or reaching for something bigger. That night, unable to sleep, she pulled out the box where she kept her savings and counted it. $83. Not enough to buy land. Not even close. But enough to survive on for a few months if she needed to. Enough to take a chance. The next week passed in a blur of work and worry. Daisy kept the boarding house running while Mrs. Chen started the process of packing up her personal belongings. The new owner came by twice, a middle-aged man from back east who kept calling it quaint in a way that made Daisy's teeth clench. On Tuesday, a letter arrived. Not a telegram this time, but actual paper in an envelope with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it carefully. Dear Miss Harper, I received your telegram and I understand your decision. I can't say I'm not disappointed, but I respect it. You came a long way on a promise I couldn't keep, and you made something of yourself anyway. That takes strength. I'm selling my homestead and moving to Billings. My sister's family has room for me, and the doctor says I shouldn't be alone out here anymore. It's not what I planned, but plans change. I hope Montana treats you well. I hope you find what you're looking for. With respect, Samuel Garrett. The letter was kind, gracious even, and it made Daisy feel worse than if he'd been angry. She showed it to Rhett the following Saturday, handing it over while he was fixing a section of fence that had come loose during the last storm. He read it quickly, handed it back. He's a good man. I know. But he wasn't the right man for you. How do you know that? Rhett hammered in another nail before answering. Because the right man wouldn't have needed you to change who you are, wouldn't have needed you to fit into a space that was already defined. The right man would have made room for whoever you turned out to be. And you think you're that man? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Rhett looked at her, his expression unreadable. I'm not offering marriage, Daisy. I'm offering partnership. There's a difference. What difference? Marriage comes with expectations, roles, rules about how things should be. Partnership is just two people trying to build something together, figuring it out as they go. He set down his hammer. I won't lie and say I don't care about you. I do. But what I'm offering you isn't romance. It's opportunity, the chance to own something, to matter. I already matter. I know you do. But you could matter more. You could be something more than just the woman who keeps other people's houses running. He picked up the hammer again, drove in another nail. You've got 2 weeks to decide. After that, I'll need to find someone else or scale back my plans. She spent those 2 weeks in a state of constant second-guessing. She made lists of pros and cons. She asked Mrs. Chen for advice a dozen times, getting the same answer every time. Stop asking me. You already know what you want to do. On the last Saturday of November, Daisy woke before dawn and made her decision. When Rhett picked her up, she didn't wait for him to ask. Yes, she said. I'll do it. The partnership. I'm in. His face didn't change much, but something relaxed in his shoulders. Good. We'll draw up papers next week. Make it official. I have one condition. What's that? I want to buy Samuel's land. Rhett's eyebrows went up. You don't have that kind of money. No, but you do. And I want the partnership to buy it. Use it for expansion. I'll work it off, take a smaller percentage of the profits until my share of the purchase price is covered, however long that takes. That could take years. I know. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through. Then he nodded. All right. We'll make an offer on Monday. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. 50-50 partnership from the start. Equal stake. Equal say. The land belongs to both of us. That's not fair to you. Life's not fair. Business is. This is business. He looked at her directly. Say yes or no. I won't offer again. Daisy took a breath. Let it out. Yes. They shook on it, his hand rough and warm around hers, and drove out to his homestead to start planning what came next. The paperwork took 3 weeks to finalize. Samuel accepted their offer without negotiation. He seemed relieved to have it settled quickly, to move on with his life in Billings, where his sister could look after him. The lawyer in town, a pinch-faced man named Morrison, who clearly didn't approve of a woman owning property, kept asking Daisy if she understood what she was signing. Yes, she'd said each time, her patience wearing thinner. I understand perfectly. It's just unusual, Morrison had said, glancing at Rhett like he expected backup. A woman in a business partnership, especially one involving land and livestock. Then you'll have an unusual story to tell, Rhett had replied, his tone flat enough to end the conversation. They took possession of Samuel's land on December 20th. Daisy stood on the sagging porch of what was now partly hers and tried to feel something, triumph, maybe, or vindication. Instead, she just felt tired and slightly terrified. It needs work, Rhett said, coming to stand beside her. That's an understatement. We'll start with the critical repairs. Get the barn secure before winter really hits. Fix the well pump. The house can wait until spring. Daisy looked at the structure behind her, peeling paint, broken windows, a roof that was probably leaking in a dozen places. I could live here. Fix it up while we work. Rhett was quiet for a moment. You could, but it'd be smarter to stay at my place through winter. 2 people working together get more done than 2 people working separate. Come spring, we'll see where you want to be. It made sense, practical sense. But something in Daisy resisted the idea of living under Rhett's roof, even temporarily. It felt like giving up something, her independence maybe, or her right to struggle alone. I'll pay rent, she said finally. No, you won't. You're a partner, not a tenant. You stay because it makes the work easier, that's all. The boarding house closed on December 29th. Mrs. Chen left on the morning train, and Daisy stood on the platform watching her go, feeling like she was losing something she hadn't realized she'd come to depend on. Not just the job, the guidance, the steady presence of someone who understood what it meant to build a life from nothing. You'll be fine, Mrs. Chen had said that morning, pulling Daisy into a brief, awkward hug. Better than fine. You'll be extraordinary. Just don't forget to rest sometimes. Don't work yourself to death trying to prove something. What would I be proving? That you belong here. That you deserve what you've built. Mrs. Chen had pulled back, looking at her directly. You already proved that. Now you just have to believe it. Daisy moved her belongings to Rhett's homestead that afternoon. It didn't take long. She still didn't own much. A trunk of clothes, her mother's poetry book, the photograph of her parents, the small box where she kept her savings. Everything that mattered fit in the back of Rhett's wagon. He'd cleared out the second bedroom for her, the one that had been used for storage. It was small but clean, with a window that faced east and a door that locked. He'd even put fresh linens on the bed, which touched her more than she wanted to admit. Thank you, she'd said, standing in the doorway. It's just a room. It's more than that. He'd looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, changed the subject quickly. We start early tomorrow, 4:30. You up for that? I've been getting up at 4:30 for 3 months. This is different. Ranch work is harder than cooking. Then I'll learn to work harder. That first week nearly broke her. Daisy had thought she understood physical labor. She'd scrubbed floors, hauled water, lifted heavy pots and pans. But ranch work was different, relentless. The cattle needed feeding regardless of weather. Fences needed mending even when your hands were numb with cold. Equipment broke at the worst possible times and had to be fixed immediately, or the whole operation ground to a halt. She learned to throw hay bales, though the first few days left her shoulders screaming. Learned to check cattle for illness or injury, getting comfortable with large animals that could kill her without meaning to. Learned to read weather patterns, to know when a storm was coming by the way the light changed and the way the cattle behaved. Rhett was a patient teacher, but not an indulgent one. When she made mistakes, he corrected her once and expected her to remember. When she struggled with something, he showed her a better way but didn't do it for her. You have to be able to do this alone, he'd said when she'd asked for help moving a heavy gate. I won't always be here. You need to figure it out. So she'd figured it out, using leverage and determination instead of strength she didn't have. The work was brutal, but it was also clarifying. Out here, effort mattered more than appearance. Nobody cared what she looked like when she was hauling feed or fixing fence posts. They cared whether the work got done, and she got the work done. January brought the first serious cold. Temperatures dropped below zero, and the wind came howling across the open land with nothing to stop it. Daisy learned to dress in layers, to wrap her face against frostbite, to keep moving even when everything hurt because stopping meant freezing. They lost 2 calves in the first week, born too early, too weak to survive the cold. Daisy found them in the morning, stiff and frozen, and had to help Rhett drag them away from the herd. It happens, he'd said, his breath visible in the frigid air. You can't save them all. We could have brought them inside, kept them warm, and then what? They'd still be too weak. You'd just delay the inevitable. He'd looked at her, not unkindly. This land doesn't reward sentiment. It rewards hard decisions and practical thinking. She'd hated him a little in that moment, hated his pragmatism, his ability to accept loss without flinching. But she also knew he was right. They worked from before dawn until after dark, 7 days a week. There were no days off in winter ranching. The animals didn't stop needing care just because it was Sunday. The work didn't pause for holidays. On Christmas Day, they fed the cattle same as always, broke ice on the water troughs, checked fences for damage from the last storm. The only acknowledgement of the holiday was a slightly better supper. Daisy roasted a chicken instead of making stew, and Rhett produced a bottle of whiskey from somewhere. To partnership, he'd said, pouring them each a small glass. To survival, Daisy had replied, and they'd drunk in silence. The isolation was harder than the work. Daisy had gotten used to being around people at the boarding house, the constant noise and movement, the steady stream of conversation. Out here, days could pass with barely a dozen words exchanged, just the necessary communication about work, about what needed doing next. Sometimes she caught herself talking to the cattle, just to hear a voice. They didn't respond, obviously, but they listened with more patience than most people ever had. In late January, a blizzard hit that lasted 3 days. The wind drove snow sideways, piling drifts higher than Daisy's head against the barn. They moved the cattle that could fit into the barn, but most had to weather it outside, huddled together for warmth. Daisy and Rhett took shifts checking on them, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, around the clock. They'd bundle up, fight their way through the storm to count heads and make sure none had gotten separated from the herd, then back inside to thaw out before doing it again. On the second night Daisy's shift, she found a cow down in the snow. Still breathing but unable to stand, legs splayed awkwardly beneath her. Daisy tried everything she could think of, pulling, pushing, using a rope for leverage, but the animal was too heavy, too weakened by cold. She stumbled back to the house, snowblind and exhausted, and woke Rhett. "There's a cow down, east pasture. I can't get her up." He was dressed and out the door in under a minute. Together they fought back through the storm, found the cow where Daisy had left her. Rhett assessed the situation quickly. "She's calving. That's why she can't stand. Labor started wrong, probably. What do we do?" "Help her deliver, then see if she can get up." He was already on his knees in the snow, examining the cow. "I'll need you to hold her steady, and be ready. This might get messy." It got messy, and difficult, and at one point, Daisy thought they were going to lose both the cow and the calf. But Rhett worked with steady determination, his hands knowing what to do even in the howling wind and driving snow. Finally, impossibly, a calf slid into the world, wet and steaming in the frigid air. The cow lurched to her feet, something instinctive overriding her exhaustion. She turned to her calf, began licking it clean with long strokes of her rough tongue. "Will they make it?" Daisy asked, her teeth chattering. "Maybe, if we get them to shelter." Rhett was already fashioning a sling from rope. "Help me carry the calf. The mother will follow." They got them to the barn, the cow stumbling behind them, driven by the need to stay with her baby. Once inside, out of the wind, both animals seemed to stabilize. The calf started trying to stand, wobbly but alive. Daisy and Rhett stood there, covered in snow and birth fluids and exhaustion, watching new life figure out how to exist. "Good work," Rhett said finally. "I didn't do anything. You delivered it. You found her. You came to get me. You held steady when it got hard." He looked at her, his face red with cold. "That counts." They made it back to the house just as Daisy's legs started to give out. Rhett caught her before she fell, half carried her inside into the fireplace. She collapsed in front of it, unable to stop shaking. He brought blankets, wrapped them around her, made coffee so strong it was almost undrinkable. She sipped it anyway, feeling warmth slowly return to her body. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said, when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. "You weren't even close to dying." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen people die from cold. You weren't there yet." He sat down across from her, holding his own cup. "But you were right to be scared. Fear keeps you careful." "Is that what you felt? Out there?" "I felt focused, needed to get the job done." He paused. "But, yeah, I was scared too. Fear's not the enemy, panic is." The blizzard broke on the fourth day, and they spent the next week digging out, finding cattle that had drifted, checking for injuries or losses. They'd lost 6 head, not as bad as it could have been, but bad enough. Daisy helped Rhett document everything in the ledger they kept for the partnership. 6 cattle at roughly $40 each. $240 gone just like that. "That's on me," she said, staring at the numbers. "I should have checked the fences better before the storm. Should have made sure they were all secure in the south pasture. The fences were fine. The cattle drifted anyway. Sometimes that happens." Rhett took the ledger back. "We're still profitable for the year. This doesn't change that." But it felt like it changed something. Felt like proof that Daisy wasn't good enough, wasn't ready for this. That she was playing at being a rancher without actually knowing what she was doing. That night, alone in her room, she let herself cry for the first time since arriving in Montana. Not loud, dramatic crying, just quiet tears that came from exhaustion and doubt, and the bone-deep fear that she'd made a terrible mistake. In the morning, she got up at 4:30 and went back to work. February was worse than January, colder, darker, more brutal in ways that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with accumulated exhaustion. Daisy's hands developed cracks that bled when she flexed her fingers. Her back ached constantly. She lost weight despite eating more than she ever had in her life, her body burning calories just trying to stay warm. Rhett didn't look much better. He moved with a stiffness that spoke of old injuries aggravated by cold. Sometimes she'd catch him wincing when he thought she wasn't looking. They started eating supper together, not because either of them wanted company, but because it was more efficient than cooking separately. The conversations were sparse, talk of work, of what needed doing next, of problems that needed solving. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, they'd talk about other things, about the books they'd read, about what they remembered from before Montana, small pieces of themselves offered carefully. "Why ranching?" Daisy asked one night, too tired to guard her curiosity. "You could have done anything. Why this?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "My father built this place. Died before he saw it succeed. I wanted to finish what he started." "Did you finish it?" "Not yet. Probably never will. There's always something more to do. But I've made it work. That's something." "What about your wife?" The question came out before Daisy could stop it. "Sorry, that's not my business." "It's fine." He stared into his coffee. "Her name was Sarah. We married young. She wanted children. I wanted to give her that." His jaw tightened. "The pregnancy was hard. Doc said she should wait, let her body recover before trying again. But she wanted a family so badly, and I wanted to make her happy." He didn't finish the story, didn't need to. Daisy knew how it ended. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It was 3 years ago. You'd think it would hurt less by now." He stood, carried his dishes to the sink. "But some things don't heal. You just learn to work around them." March brought the first hints of thaw. The snow started melting in patches, revealing brown grass and mud underneath. The days got longer, the sun stronger, and with the changing season came new work, preparing for calving season, fixing equipment that had broken during winter, planning for spring planting. They also needed to start work on Samuel's old homestead, making it productive again. The house was still in terrible shape, but the barn could be salvaged, and the land itself was good. "We could run another 30 head over there," Rhett said, studying the property one afternoon. "Maybe 40 if we improve the grazing." "What about the house?" "What about it? We can't just let it fall apart." "Why not? We don't need it." Daisy looked at the sagging structure, imagining what it could be with enough work. "I might need it, eventually." Rhett glanced at her. "You planning to leave?" "No, but I can't live in your spare room forever. At some point, I'll need my own space." "Fair enough." He turned back to his calculations. "We'll add it to the summer work list. After calving season, before haying." Calving season started in earnest in mid-March. Suddenly, the work wasn't just maintenance and feeding, it was active crisis management. Cows went into labor at all hours. Some needed help. Some rejected their calves. Some died despite everything they tried. Daisy learned to deliver calves, though it never got easier. Learned to tube feed babies whose mothers wouldn't nurse them. Learned to make hard decisions about which animals to save and which to let go. She also learned that she was stronger than she'd thought, that she could work 20-hour days and still get up the next morning, that she could do things she'd been certain were impossible. One night in late March, after a particularly difficult delivery, Rhett found her in the barn, sitting with a newborn calf that wasn't nursing properly. "You should sleep," he said. "I will. After this one figures out how to eat." He sat down beside her in the straw, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You've done good work this winter." "I've made mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how you handle them." He was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't sure you'd last when we started this. Thought maybe you'd make it a month before deciding this wasn't for you. You didn't show it. Wouldn't have been fair. You deserved a real chance." He stood, brushed straw from his pants. "Turns out I was wrong. You're tougher than I gave you credit for." After he left, Daisy sat with the calf until it finally figured out how to nurse. Then she stumbled to bed and slept for 4 hours before the next crisis woke her. April brought rain and mud and the exhausting work of moving cattle to fresh pasture. The snow was gone, but the ground was saturated, making everything harder. Wagons got stuck, fences sagged under the weight of wet earth. Daisy spent more time covered in mud than clean, but the land was coming alive again. Green pushing through brown, flowers blooming in unexpected places, birds returning from wherever they'd spent the winter. One morning, Daisy woke to find the sun streaming through her window at an angle she hadn't seen in months. The air felt different, warmer, softer. She got dressed and went outside to find Rhett already working, repairing a section of fence. "Spring's here," he said when he saw her. "Feels like it. Means we can start on the other house soon, get it livable before next winter." Daisy looked across the land toward Samuel's old homestead. Her homestead, technically. Half hers, anyway. "I want to do most of the work myself." "Why?" "Because it needs to be mine, really mine, not just on paper." She met his eyes. "I need to build it with my own hands." Rhett considered this, then nodded. "All right, but I'm helping with the heavy stuff. No point in you hurting yourself trying to prove something." "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Yes, you are, and that's fine. Just don't be stupid about it." They started work on the house in May. Daisy spent her mornings on regular ranch work, feeding, checking cattle, managing the endless tasks that kept everything running. Afternoons, she'd head to the other property and work on repairs. The first week, she just cleared debris. Years of neglect had left the place filled with broken furniture, rotting wood, animal nests. She hauled it all out, burned what would burn, salvaged what could be saved. The second week, she started on the roof. Rhett helped her with this, showing her how to replace shingles, how to seal gaps, how to check for structural damage. It was hard work, dangerous work, and Daisy loved every minute of it. By the end of May, the house had a solid roof, new windows, and doors that actually closed properly. It was still rough. The floors needed replacing, the walls needed plastering, the whole place needed painting, but it was starting to look like something that could be lived in. Daisy stood in the middle of the main room one evening, sweaty and exhausted and covered in sawdust, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in what she'd built. Rhett appeared in the doorway, carrying supplies they'd need for the next day's work. He looked around, nodded his approval. "It's coming along." "It is." "You think you'll move in before winter?" "That's the plan." He set down the supplies, started to leave, then paused. "Daisy?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you stayed. Glad you chose this." He met her eyes. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you've built something real here, something that matters." "We built it, both of us." "No, you built your piece. I just helped." He smiled slightly. "There's a difference." After he left, Daisy sat on the porch steps and watched the sun set over land that was partly hers, land she'd worked and bled for, land that had tested her and not found her wanting. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train 9 months ago, scared and hopeful and desperately trying to be chosen by someone, anyone. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone Daisy used to be but couldn't quite remember being. She'd come to Montana to be someone's wife, to fill a role, to fit into a life someone else had built. Instead, she'd built her own life, claimed her own land, become her own person. And sitting there in the fading light, Daisy realized she didn't want to go back to that room at Rhett's homestead. Didn't want to be a guest in someone else's space, even a welcome one. She wanted to live here, in this house she was building. Wanted to prove to herself that she could stand alone, even if she didn't have to. Daisy moved into the house in early September, a full month before she'd planned. The floors were still rough in places, and the kitchen lacked proper shelving, but it had walls and a roof and a stove that worked. That was enough. Rhett helped her move her belongings, still just the one trunk, though she'd acquired a few pieces of furniture over the summer. A table and chairs she'd bought from a family leaving Montana. A rocking chair she'd found abandoned behind the general store and repaired. Small things, but hers. "You sure about this?" he asked, setting down the last of her things. "Winter's coming. You'd be warmer at my place." "I survived one winter in Montana. I can survive another." "That winter you had help. Someone to split shifts with during storms." "I'll manage." She looked around the sparse room, feeling something settle in her chest. "I need to do this. Need to know I can." He didn't argue further, just nodded and headed for the door. Then he stopped, turned back. "I'll check on you. Every few days. Make sure you're not frozen solid or buried under snow." "I don't need checking on." "I know, I'm doing it anyway." He pulled his hat lower. "We're partners. That means looking out for each other, even when you're being stubborn." After he left, Daisy stood in the silence of her own home and felt the weight of it. Not just the house. The whole decision. She'd chosen isolation over companionship, chosen proving something over comfort, chosen hard over easy. She hoped it wasn't a mistake. The first weeks alone were harder than she'd expected. Not the work. That was familiar by now. But the silence. The long evenings with no one to talk to, no sound except wind and the settling of the house. She'd gotten used to Rhett's presence over the winter, the quiet comfort of knowing someone else was nearby. Now there was just her and the land and the persistent doubt that maybe she'd pushed too hard, demanded too much independence when what she actually needed was connection. But she didn't go back. Didn't ask Rhett if she could return to his spare room. Instead, she worked on making the house more livable. Built shelves for the kitchen, sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town, planted a small garden behind the house, even though it was late in the season and most things wouldn't have time to grow. She did it because it was hers to do, because every nail she drove and every seed she planted was proof that she belonged here. Rhett came by on Wednesdays and Saturdays, always with some excuse about checking fences or looking at cattle. They'd work together for a few hours, then sit on her porch and drink coffee while discussing the partnership business. He never stayed long, never made her feel crowded, but his visits became the rhythm she structured her weeks around. It was during one of these visits in late September that he told her about the offer. Man came by yesterday, wants to buy cattle, says he's got buyers back east willing to pay premium for Montana-raised beef. Daisy set down her coffee. How premium? $60 a head, maybe more if the quality's right. She did the math quickly. They had roughly 120 head between both properties. Even selling half would bring in significant money, enough to make real improvements, enough to expand. What's the catch? No catch, just timing. He needs delivery by November 1st, wants them driven to the rail station in Billings. That's a 6-day drive, maybe more with that many cattle. It is. We'd need help. Can't manage that size herd with just 2 people. So we hire help. Already put the word out. Got 3 men interested. Good workers, all of them. But it'll cost us. Daisy thought about it, turning the numbers over in her mind. What's our profit after we pay the help and cover the drive costs? Rhett pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, showed her the calculations he'd already done. Even after expenses, they'd clear more than they'd made all year. We do this, Daisy said, and we could pay off half the debt on this property by year's end. That's what I figured. Then let's do it. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing, selecting which cattle to sell, getting them separated from the main herd, making sure they were in good condition for the journey. The 3 hired men showed up a week before the drive was scheduled to begin, 2 brothers named Jack and Tom who'd done trail drives before, and an older man called Dutch who'd worked cattle his entire life. They all looked at Daisy with varying degrees of skepticism when Rhett introduced her as his partner. She going on the drive? Jack asked, not bothering to hide his doubt. She is, Rhett said flatly. No offense, but a woman on a trail drive is just asking for trouble. Then don't cause trouble, Daisy said, her voice level. I can ride, I can work cattle, I can handle whatever needs handling. If that's a problem for you, there's other work in other places. Jack had the grace to look embarrassed. No problem here, ma'am. They left before dawn on October 15th, driving 60 head of cattle toward Billings. The first day was chaos. Cattle that had been calm on the range suddenly decided they wanted to go in every direction except the right one. Daisy spent hours in the saddle, chasing down strays and cursing the particular stupidity of cows. The horse Rhett had given her, a sturdy mare named Bess, was patient with her inexperience, seeming to understand that Daisy was still learning. By the end of the first day, every muscle in Daisy's body screamed, and she could barely walk when she dismounted. Dutch watched her struggle to unsaddle Bess and offered quiet advice. You're gripping too tight with your legs, trying to hold on through strength. Let the horse do the work. You just balance. The second day was worse. Her inner thighs were raw from the saddle, her back felt like someone had beaten it with a board, and her hands had blisters on top of blisters. But she didn't complain, didn't ask for easier duties, just gritted her teeth and kept working. That night, sitting around the fire while the men told stories, Tom looked at her with something approaching respect. You're tougher than you look, he said. I'd have to be, Daisy replied, too tired for anything but honesty. The third day brought rain, cold, driving rain that soaked through their clothes and made the cattle miserable and unpredictable. They lost 2 head in a ravine. The animals spooked by thunder and ran before anyone could stop them. Rhett and Jack spent 2 hours retrieving them while the rest kept the main herd together. When they finally made camp that night, everyone was cold, wet, and exhausted. Daisy tried to start a fire with damp wood, failed 3 times, and finally got it going through sheer stubborn determination. She hung her clothes to dry and sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering and wondering if this whole enterprise had been a terrible idea. Rhett sat down beside her, handed her a tin cup of something that smelled strongly of whiskey. "Drink it. You'll warm up faster." She drank, coughed as it burned down her throat. "This is awful." "It's effective." "Do you think we'll make it? To Billings?" "We'll make it. Question is whether we'll still have 60 head when we get there." "We've only lost 2. So far." He stared into the fire. "Trail drives are unpredictable. Could lose more. Could lose none. Just have to keep moving and hope the weather holds." The weather didn't hold. The 4th day brought more rain and wind strong enough to knock a man sideways. The cattle were restless, wanting to turn back, wanting to scatter. It took all 5 of them working constantly to keep the herd together and moving forward. Daisy fell off her horse twice that day. Once when Bess shied at something Daisy didn't see. Once when she simply lost her grip trying to rope a stray. Both times she got back up, climbed back on, kept working. Her body was past pain now, operating on something else. Determination, maybe. Or just too stubborn to quit. That night, Dutch pulled her aside while she was checking Bess for injuries. "You're doing good work," he said quietly. "Better than some men I've ridden with." "I'm barely staying in the saddle." "Nobody expects you to be perfect. They just expect you to show up and do your part. Which you are." He paused. "Rhett's lucky to have you as a partner." The word settled something in Daisy's chest. Not pride, exactly. More like confirmation. Like someone who actually knew what they were talking about, had looked at her work and found it acceptable. The 5th day was clear and cold, the ground frozen solid underfoot. The cattle moved better in the cold, less likely to spook or scatter. They made good time, covering more miles than the previous 3 days combined. By evening, they could see Billings in the distance, lights starting to appear as dusk fell. They'd made it. 60 head minus the 2 they'd lost, driven across rough country in terrible weather. Daisy wanted to feel triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. They delivered the cattle the next morning to the buyer's holding pens. The man inspected them, nodded his satisfaction, and handed Rhett a bank draft for the agreed-upon amount. $60 a head for 58 head. $3,480. Daisy stared at the number on the draft, unable to quite believe it was real. More money than she'd ever seen in her life. More money than she'd imagined having. After they paid the hired men and covered the expenses, they were left with just over $3,000. Split equally, that was $1,500 each. "We should reinvest it," Daisy said as they rode back toward their properties, the hired men having gone their separate ways. "Use it to expand the operation, buy more breeding stock." "We could," Rhett agreed. "Or we could pay down debt, get the properties clear faster." "What do you want to do?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to make sure you've got security, real security. The kind that doesn't disappear if one winter goes bad or if I get hurt and can't work. That's not going to happen." "It could. It almost did to Samuel." He looked at her directly. "I'm saying we use the money smart. Some to expand, some to secure what we've got. Build something that'll last." They spent the next week working out the details, paid off 1/3 of the remaining debt on Samuel's old property, bought 10 head of quality breeding stock, set aside money for winter supplies and emergency repairs, put the rest in the bank, earning interest. By mid-November, they were financially stable in a way neither of them had been before. Not rich. They'd never be rich. But solid, secure. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. Daisy watched it from her window and felt ready for it in a way she hadn't been the previous year. Her house was tight and warm. Her pantry was stocked. She had firewood stacked high against the north wall and a plan for getting through the cold months. Rhett still came by twice a week, but now she went to his place too, helping with work that was easier done together. They fell back into the rhythm they'd developed the previous winter, working hard, talking little, finding comfort in routine. It was during one of these visits, a week before Christmas, that everything changed. They were in Rhett's barn, checking on a cow that was showing signs of illness, when he suddenly stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made Daisy's stomach clench. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. That's not—" He stopped, started again. "When you first came to Montana, I thought you were making a mistake. Thought you'd turn around and leave as soon as things got hard. I know, you've said that. Let me finish." He took a breath. "I was wrong. You didn't leave. You stayed. You worked harder than anyone I've ever known. You built something real here." Another pause. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a business partner." Daisy's heart was hammering now. "What do you see me as?" "As someone I don't want to lose, someone I look forward to seeing, someone who makes this life feel less empty." He met her eyes. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to know, if you wanted more than partnership, more than just working the land together, I'd want that too." She couldn't breathe for a moment, couldn't think. This was the last thing she'd expected. "You said you weren't offering romance," she finally managed. "You said it was just business." "I lied. Or maybe I was lying to myself, I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I told myself it was safer to keep it business, safer not to want things, but I can't seem to help it. I want—" He stopped, looked away. "I want you to be more than my partner. I want you to be my life." Daisy's first instinct was to say yes, to take what he was offering and be grateful for it, but something held her back. "What kind of life?" she asked quietly. "What?" "You said you want me to be your life. What does that look like? Do I move back to your place? Give up the house I built? Become your wife and give up my share of the partnership? No, that's not— I wouldn't ask you to give up anything. But things would change. They'd have to." She held his gaze. "I need to know what you're asking for. What you expect." Rhett was quiet for a long moment, working through it. "I expect you to keep being who you are, living where you want to live, working like you've been working. I expect us to keep being partners, equal partners, in the business." He paused. "But I also want us to be partners in everything else. Want to know that at the end of a hard day, we've got each other. Want to build something together that's bigger than just cattle and land." That sounds like marriage. It could be, if that's what you wanted, or it could be something else, something we figure out as we go. He stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to fit into a role, Daisy. I'm asking if you want to build something new, together." She thought about it, really thought about it, about what it would mean to say yes, about what she'd be gaining and what she'd be risking. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately, would have been so grateful to be wanted that she wouldn't have questioned the terms. But now, after everything she'd built and survived and proven, she understood something crucial. She didn't need someone to complete her life. She'd already built a complete life on her own. The question was whether she wanted to share it. "I want 3 things," she said finally. "All right. First, I keep my house. It's mine. I built it. Even if I don't live there all the time, it stays mine. Done. Second, the partnership stays equal, 50-50, no matter what else changes between us. Already is, won't change. Third," she took a breath. "Third, you have to understand that I'm not Sarah. I can't be her, won't try to be her. If we do this, you're getting me, all of me, the good and the difficult, and the parts that don't fit anyone's expectations." Something shifted in Rhett's expression, softened. "I'm not asking for Sarah. I'm asking for you, exactly as you are. Even though I'm—" She gestured at herself, at her size, at everything she'd spent her life being judged for. "Especially because of who you are." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. "You're the strongest person I know, the most determined, the most real. Why would I want you to be anyone else?" Daisy felt something break open in her chest, not painfully, more like something that had been held too tight finally releasing. "Yes," she said, "I want to build something with you." He kissed her then, and it wasn't like anything she'd imagined, not perfect or romantic or any of the things books had promised. It was hesitant and awkward and tasted like coffee and felt exactly right. They were married in January in the small church in town with Mrs. Chen's replacement at the boarding house as witness. No white dress. Daisy wore her best work dress, the brown one she'd sewn herself. No flowers or fancy decorations, just two people making promises they intended to keep. Afterward, they went back to the ranch, both ranches technically, and got back to work, because there was always work to be done, and marriage didn't change that. But it changed other things. The way they moved around each other, more comfortable now. The way Rhett would reach for her hand while they were riding just because he wanted to. The way Daisy would lean against him in the evenings, too tired to stay upright but not wanting to be apart. She still kept her house. Still spent time there when she needed to be alone to remind herself that she could stand on her own. But most nights she slept at Rhett's place, their place now, because sleeping alone had stopped feeling like independence and started feeling like stubbornness. Spring came with new calves and hard work and plans for expansion. They bought more land from a neighbor who was retiring, adding another 80 acres to their operation, hired a full-time hand to help with the daily work, started building a second barn. In April, Daisy discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified her, not because she didn't want a child, but because she knew what pregnancy had cost Sarah, knew what it could cost her. Rhett was terrified too, though he tried to hide it. She could see it in the way he hovered, the way he tried to do all the heavy work himself, the way he looked at her like she might break. "I'm not dying," she told him one evening when his anxiety had reached unbearable levels. "You don't know that. Neither do you, but worrying won't change anything." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach where the baby was just beginning to show. "I'm strong. I've proven that. I'll get through this too." "What if you don't?" "Then you'll keep going, same as you did before, same as you've always done." She met his eyes. "But I'm planning to survive, planning to meet this baby and raise it and teach it everything I've learned. So stop treating me like I'm already gone." He tried. Didn't always succeed, but he tried. The pregnancy was hard. Daisy was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Her body ached in new ways, struggled with the additional weight in ways that frustrated her. But she kept working, kept moving, kept refusing to let fear make her small. The doctor in town was skeptical about her size and her age. She was 32, which he considered dangerously old for a first pregnancy. He suggested she stay in bed for the last month, rest as much as possible. Daisy ignored him. She couldn't afford to spend a month in bed. There was too much work to do. In October, on a clear, cold morning that felt like the one a year ago when she'd made that first cattle drive, Daisy went into labor. It lasted 14 hours. Brutal, exhausting hours where she was certain she'd made a terrible mistake, that her body couldn't do this, that she was going to die just like Sarah had. But she didn't die. At dawn, with Rhett holding her hand and the doctor looking vaguely surprised, Daisy brought a daughter into the world. Small but healthy, with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn expression. They named her Rose because Daisy wanted her to have a name that was soft and pretty, wanted her to have choices her mother never had. Recovery was slow. Daisy's body had been through trauma, needed time to heal. For the first few weeks, she could barely walk without pain, but slowly, steadily, she got stronger. By Christmas, she was back to working the ranch, Rose strapped to her chest while she did lighter duties. The baby seemed to like the movement, would fall asleep to the rhythm of her mother's walking. The hands they'd hired, they had 2 full-time workers now, teased Rhett about having a rancher baby who'd probably be roping cattle before she could walk. "Probably," Daisy agreed, not seeing the problem. Winter passed with the usual hardships, but felt different now. The house was fuller, louder. Rose would cry at odd hours, demanding attention, and Daisy would stumble out of bed exhausted and somehow more content than she'd ever been. Spring brought new challenges. Rose was crawling now, getting into everything, requiring constant supervision. Daisy learned to work with one eye, always on her daughter, learned to be efficient in ways she'd never imagined. It was during one of these chaotic spring days, with Rose creating disaster in the kitchen while Daisy tried to make bread, that a wagon pulled up outside. Daisy wiped flour from her hands and went to the door, Rose balanced on her hip. A woman was climbing down from the wagon, young, maybe 20, with a trunk in the back and fear written all over her face. "Can I help you?" Daisy asked. I'm looking for the boarding house. Mrs. Chen's place? I was told it was in town, but someone said it closed, and they thought maybe you might know where I could find a room. The woman trailed off, looking embarrassed. The boarding house did close, about 2 years ago. Daisy studied the woman, the careful way she held herself, the too large traveling dress that had clearly been let out in places, the desperate hope in her eyes. Why are you looking for a room? I came to marry a man, met him through letters, but when I got to town they said he'd left. Moved to California 3 months ago. Her voice wavered. I spent everything getting here, don't have money for a ticket back east. Daisy felt something twist in her chest. Recognition. Understanding. What's your name? Margaret. Margaret Collins. Well, Margaret, I don't have a boarding house, but I've got space in my barn, and I could use help around here if you're willing to work. Pays not much, but it includes meals and a place to sleep. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that? For a stranger? Someone did it for me once. Figured I'd return the favor. Daisy shifted Rose to her other hip. It's hard work, long hours. Montana's not forgiving, but if you're willing to learn, there's a place for you here. Yes, Margaret said immediately. Yes, I'll work. I'll do anything. Daisy smiled, remembering another young woman saying those same words 2 years ago on a train platform. Remembering how terrified she'd been, how certain she was that she'd made a mistake. Come on inside, she said. Let's get you settled, then we'll figure out what comes next. She led Margaret into the house she'd built with her own hands, on land she'd claimed through work and will. Rose babbled happily on her hip, reaching for Margaret's hair. Outside, she could hear Rhett working with the cattle, the sounds of a ranch in full operation. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd come west expecting to find, but the one she'd built anyway, piece by stubborn piece. She was no longer the woman who'd waited on that platform, hoping to be chosen. She was the woman who'd chosen herself, who'd claimed what she needed, who'd proven that worthiness wasn't given. It was built. And standing in her kitchen with flour on her hands and her daughter on her hip and a scared young woman looking at her like she was salvation, Daisy understood something fundamental. She'd stopped being invisible years ago, stopped being the person people looked past. Now she was the person they looked toward, the one they came to for help, for guidance, for proof that survival was possible. She'd become undeniable, and that, more than anything else she'd achieved, felt like victory.